Split screen is no longer a thing, and that really sucks. No more getting with your buddies and playing some split screen games. I always felt like people underappreciate co-op split screen. Any game that has a story mode or campaign, or maybe even just a different game mode that is co-op, is always a fat W. You won't forget that game even if it's absolutely terrible. Fear 3 comes to mind. By the way, multiplayer and co-op are different, or at least I'll separate them for this video. Multiplayer is basically any versus mode that is literally just you versus your friend, so basically like deathmatch and stuff. And I won't really talk about any fighting game or racing game because that's just multiplayer games. Those games are specifically made to be multiplayer, and I feel like that doesn't really fit what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to talk about games that are usually single player and have a side mode or just co-op in general. Also, just a side note, this is a really weird video to edit because obviously it's very distracting to have a bunch of split screens on the screen all the time. So that's why you'll see a bunch of Resident Evil 4 footage. And also because I just don't want to steal a bunch of split screen footage off YouTube, you know? But it's funny because every time I show footage of split screen, you'll notice how it's always a really old video and a really old video game. And that kind of supports my whole point that they don't make split screen anymore. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that. With that being said, PS1 and PS2 barely had any co-op games. I honestly can't think of any. Maybe Half-Life 1 for the PS2, it had co-op. But that's about it. That's the only game I can think of that actually had a co-op game mode. Anything else that comes to mind is always a fighting game or a racing game. During the PS3 era, especially very early on, co-op was finally a thing. You can actually play the main game mode, usually a story mode or campaign, in co-op. This was huge. Okay, Halo did it too and they did it really good, and it was basically during the PS2 era, but I'm trying to make a point here. The PS3 launched with a 4-player co-op split screen FPS game, Resistance Fall of Man. And yes, that game is quote unquote trash. I actually think it's overhated AF, but I'm saving my thoughts on that. Anyways, yeah, you could play the entire campaign with 4-player split screen, and it ran surprisingly well. I remember playing it. This could never be a thing on the PS5. You see, the PS3 is in this weird limbo where they were still treating gaming as a fun activity rather than this colossal empire of entertainment. There was no trends yet to sell games. Studios were still experimenting with ideas. You had some of the weirdest games ever, Naughty Bear, Dead Block, and Fat Princess, just to name a few. Just the most fever dreamish ideas ever. In a way, this kept co-op alive, because they would see it as, hey, this would be funner with more people, let's add it. And shit, if it doesn't run, at least you're playing with your bud. Instead of, can the game run this? We would have to reallocate all of our resources just to add split screen. Also, it's just the fact that there was barely any standards on how a game should play, feel, run, or look. Usually split screen lowers the graphics settings and more specifically the resolution, which makes sense. You have twice as much on the screen. Games nowadays can barely run with just one player, so ain't no way they would even think of adding split screen. And this is why split screen faded away and multiplayer stuck around, because games in general became more complicated, harder to run. So it's super rare to ever see co-op campaigns or even just co-op game modes. You don't see huge set pieces or huge enemy and projectile counts in multiplayer maps. So usually those maps and game modes are optimized for split screen and multiplayer. So it makes sense why campaigns are so often not split screen. Campaigns are just more demanding in general. Look, I'm a hardcore coop gamer. Like, I seriously like playing video games with my friends and cousins in the same room. I went to hell and back to play coop at times. Have you ever tried playing Borderlands 2 split screen co-op on the PS3? That is nightmare fuel. I'd rather take 3 tabs and fight the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse than play Borderlands 2 on the PS3. If you didn't know, it's basically busted. Borderlands 2 can barely run single player, and adding split screen literally crashes the game. Well, not literally, but it gets so bad that me and my cousin were like, oh, don't open your inventory at all until we get through this area and it saves. Because no joke, it would crash every single time we would open the inventory or try to buy stuff like ammo. And you know what's scariest? You can play this game in 4-player split screen. Yeah, it probably will literally be unplayable, but it's there, and that's what matters. It's a testament to how different standards were back then. Anyways, so next time I went over, I literally brought my own PS3, my own TV, and my own copy of Borderlands 2 with me, and I would hook it up in the same room and literally have a LAN party of just 2, me and my cousin. Yeah, I was that serious about co-op. I mean shit, at some point we had some super shitty laptops and we wanted to play something, so we installed a cracked version of CS 1.6 on our shitty laptops, and played that in the same room, but we didn't want to fight each other. We could play Call of Duty or literally any shooter. No, we wanted to play co-op. So we put ourselves in the same team and we set the boss to the hardest difficulty and spawned like 20 of them. So it was like a survival mode. It was actually kind of fun. So yeah, we were so starved of co-op that we decided to make our own co-op on CS 1.6 on some laptops that ran on like Windows Vista. And remember kids, any PC and any laptop is strong enough to run any game if you're brave enough. I hope that clears how serious I am about co-op. Truth is, this might be a hot take, but I always find that normal multiplayer modes are boring after like an hour. I'm talking about death matches in general because that's the only thing I can think of when I think of multiplayer game mode. It seems every single game nowadays that has split screen is usually just for that. And these are fun, don't get me wrong, especially with a lot of friends. But after a while it gets stale, and you literally always stop playing because you guys just get bored, because it's the only way you stop playing. It's like, oh, I'm bored, oh, okay. Obviously it's always a fun time to fight against your Tomodachis, but after a few matches you'll realize who is the best and who is the worst. This especially happens in fighting games. It's not fun fighting the worst player because it's too easy. So you can only really have fun fighting the really good player. But then the really good player might be too good, so he might not even be having that much fun at all, and maybe even going easy on the others. And we all been there. It's not really fun to go easy on people. There's always a noticeable skill gap. Of course, again, I swear I'm fun at parties. It is always fun to play with friends, but the skill gap is undeniable. So that's why co-op is so much more fun, because it's not about skill gaps or skills in general. It's about progression and fun. Keyword: progression. It's just the fact that you're actively working towards getting to the end of the game that is so satisfying. It's just really entertaining because you want to see stuff unravel, and when you get to the end you actually feel like you accomplished something and now you're done. You know, you can stop playing now, and it feels satisfying. It doesn't feel like, hey, I'm bored, let's stop playing, like with death matches and stuff. It's almost like watching a movie, but it has your guys' input. There is something about going through a whole story and playing through it with a friend that is unmatched. I swear there was no greater feeling than wanting to play a game with your friend, but not knowing whether the game had multiplayer or not. And then there it is, that press X to join prompt somewhere on the screen. You already knew shit was gonna go down for the next 6 hours. And by that I mean that whoever got the top screen would bitch about getting the top screen for 6 hours. Seriously, even the shittiest games become so enjoyable. One of them being Kane and Lynch 2. You can play that game in co-op, and god is it fun. You have this gnarly story and set pieces, and it's so much fun to play with someone. Shooting down goons in your birthday suit in the streets of Shanghai with your bud is the funnest shit ever. It's especially fun when games with co-op already happen to have another character as a sidekick with the main character, because usually when you play co-op on one of these games, someone plays as a sidekick. And I don't know, it's so much more immersive that way. But I always did respect games that literally just spawn or clone like 4 of the main characters just so you can play 4-player campaign. Is it immersion breaking? Sure, it can be. But do we care? No. Seriously, I think this has actually been used as an excuse before to not implement split screen. So yeah, as the PS3 era ended, we saw less and less games with co-op. Halo Infinite downright cut it out. Even if people managed to glitch their way into it, they just said, nah, let's just not add it. Call of Duty basically gave it the middle finger and only has it added because they know people would bitch about it if they remove it. Seriously, have you ever tried playing multiplayer split screen in any of the recent CODs that looks like a McDonald's tablet menu? You would have an easier time finding Amelia Earhart's plane crash in the middle of the ocean than the split screen option. Now we usually get games specifically made for split screen. Oh, what do you know? They're actually really good. I don't know, there was always something cool about having a co-op mode or a co-op campaign in a game that you knew as a single player game. COD Zombies is possibly the biggest co-op mode ever made. And I don't really think that's a hot take. I was always fascinated by horde modes. They were always so much fun to play with friends, and it didn't even matter what game, it was just always fun. Trying to get as far as you can and survive, starting up a new game after you guys died, and instantly assembling a master plan that will fail. I'm actually kinda glad this is a thing that we still see to this day, but sadly it's just not the same for co-op campaigns. They aren't split screen anymore. So many new games that claim to be co-op and are all about shooting down hordes and relying on teammates, and yet not one of them is split screen co-op. It just seems like the biggest missed opportunity ever. Left 4 Dead will always be the GOAT because of that. When I see co-op, I always associate it with split screen. Now games rely on online co-op to check that co-op checkbox. because people didn't stress enough how important couch co-op was, so they do the least now. Because it's less stress on the consoles than split screen, more sales since if you want to play with your friend, you would have to buy double of everything. And I know I'll get a bunch of Space Marine 2 freshies saying that it's just as fun online. Yes, it's fun. But nah, you just haven't played couch co-op in a long time, partner. Online co-op don't hit the same. It hits, but it doesn't hit the same. Yeah, say what you want about any of my arguments being invalid because now you can play online co-op, but remember this, you can only ever really pass the doobie in person.